The ongoing situation between Russia and Ukraine has led to Prime Minister Trudeau taking a trip to Europe, which will be concluding on his final day happening today. Joining me now to discuss what he thinks may come out of these, I guess you could call them meetings or perhaps negotiations on Justin Trudeau's foreign trip to Europe. Joining me now to discuss this is Gerald Butts, former principal secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who's also the vice chairman at the Eurasia Group. Thank you very much for making the time. I do want to start out with the trip that Justin Trudeau is currently on. I believe this is his last day of that trip. What do you think? You worked closely with the Prime Minister. What do you think will come out of this meeting? What do you think the overall, obviously the purpose of this meeting was to try and, I guess, allow peace to happen between Russia and Ukraine. But what role do you think Canada plays in that? And how do you think Justin Trudeau will go about approaching, hopefully trying to de-escalate this conflict?
Well, thanks, Wyatt. And first of all, before I get into your excellent question, thank you for having me on and congratulations on all your success. You made quite a following here in Canada, and congratulations on it and good luck in the future. Obviously, the most important role that Canada can play in this crisis is to be a cohesive force within NATO. Canada is not able to take on Russia by itself, and the only force probably within the world that can is a strong and cohesive NATO. So I think it's really important that leaders from the alliance and more broadly speaking in the West get together in person and develop a coherent strategy for dealing with this crisis, which I fear will be with us for some time.
When you look at Russia, obviously it's very big in land size, but when you look at, the wealth that various countries have, Russia is not the wealthiest country in the world. I mean, I guess my next question would be, does the size of, land that, Russia has, is that, I guess, something that you think is often looked at as, I guess, a symbol that Russia is more powerful, considering that, countries, that a large portion of countries are a little bit more wealthy than Russia is?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. For those of us who are kind of my age and older, we remember the Cold War very vividly. I was in my first year of university when the wall came down in Berlin and sort of signaled the end of the Cold War. What we've seen over the past few weeks, unfortunately, is the end of that period itself. So we had a long 30-year period where from a strategic point of view, a geostrategic point of view, the West Russia didn't occupy the forefront of the West's imagination like it did through the period from the end of the Second World War until the wall came down. What we're facing now is, of course, the realization that Russia, while its economy is only about the size of Spain and shrinking rapidly because of the sanctions that have been pretty quickly put in place by the West, is still a very strong military power. It has nuclear parity with the United States and at least cyber parity with the United States. It possibly has even greater forces from a cyber offense perspective than the US. So I think it's a mistake to think of Russia as powerful as powerful as it was in the Soviet period, but it's also a mistake to underestimate Russia's power.
And I mean, obviously, a peaceful resolution to the conflict and for the conflict to be resolved peacefully is obviously, the least dangerous situation. But even if this conflict is resolved peacefully, Russia and Ukraine are still going to be directly beside each other. How, should other countries around the world and other governments around the world, do you think they'll have to continue to support Ukraine even after, this war is over?
Yeah, I think the West is in particular in for the long haul on supporting Ukraine. I wish, Wyatt, I had a better, more hopeful analysis of the situation and that I could tell you I think there's going to be a peaceful resolution in short order. I don't think there is. I think that Russia has made a very significant strategic error in trying to take over Ukraine, but they're in it now. And unfortunately, I think they're all in.
And I mean, numerous people, and I believe Prime Minister Trudeau even said this himself, that he believes Ukraine will ultimately prevail and will ultimately win the battle. Would you agree with him and some of the other world leaders who have made comments such as that?
I would. I'm half Ukrainian. My mother's family was Ukrainian. And one thing I can tell you about Ukrainian people is that they will never, ever give up their country. So regardless of how long Russia wants to stay, it's going to be a very unpleasant stay.
And I mean, I've spoken to people in Ukraine. I spoke to a couple of Ukrainian members of parliament, and their analysis and their insight. They were all on the ground actually in Kiev. You're a former political staffer, being the former principal secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau. I mean, I guess just go through the process of you're sitting in Canada, watching, as are all of us, the ongoing situation in Ukraine. What's going through your head as you think to yourselves, these are, political staffers, these are MPs who basically hold the same type of role as people in Canada do and are going through obviously a very difficult time.
Well, it's pretty hard to imagine sitting in a city like Ottawa or a country like Canada, what they're going through in Kiev. From my perspective, I would reach out to colleagues both there and around the world, and in particular in the NATO alliance, to make sure that we're all coordinated and we're getting as much help as we can as quickly as possible to the places where it's needed most. And as emotionally draining as situations like this can be when you're in an important job like the Prime Minister's office or the White House or 10 Downing Street or wherever, it's really important that you put those aside and try and do your job as quickly and as efficiently and as well as possible, because a lot of people depend on you.
Okay, that is Gerald Butts, former principal secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau and vice chairman of the Eurasia Group. Thank you so much for joining me, and it's been great chatting with you. And thank you again for providing some of your insight.
It's a pleasure to be here, Wyatt, and good luck in the future.
Thanks.